welcome back to church. For those of you who were gone during the break, we're excited that you're back with us. You look wonderful. I'm sure you had a wonderful Christmas and New Year. Everybody say thanks to Luke for bringing out the TV for me today. Luke. Hey, we're launching into a brand new series today, and it's called Dismantle, Rebuild. And the idea behind it is that you kind of sometimes have to go back to the irreducible minimums, to the core, to rebuild back to kind of where you are, kind of get back in the right direction. The reason that we do this, and you know this, by the way, if you're a part of a company, especially if you own a business, if you run an organization, or you're just kind of somewhere central to the leadership, what can happen inevitably in the life of any company, any organization, any nonprofit, in fact, it happens with teams all over the country, is that as you grow, as you progress forward, the nature of growth is complexity. The nature of personal growth is complexity. The nature of organizational growth is complexity. And oftentimes what happens to a business is as a business grows, it has a product, it has a set of core values that really launched the business or the company. But as the company grew, it became complex. And as it became complex, there's this inevitable pull of complexity that leads us away from the central thing that helped us to grow in the first place. You'll see companies who launched a core product or had a set of core values, and eventually they had to fill it with, again, complex systems and organizations in order to sustain the growth. But unfortunately, the complexity of the systems and the organization became the means and not the, ends, or they can be ends and not the means to that end. You see this in teams, by the way, all the time. Let's just say hypothetically, and I'm not thinking of anything or anybody in this time, but let's just say hypothetically, you've got a team that had a really mediocre performance during this last fall, and they hired a new coach to hopefully reinstill some greatness, right? And if you are thinking what I'm thinking of, then maybe you're thinking about football, but you could judge us if you're not. But what happens is that if you know about football, you know this, that it's not just a bunch of people who are just running into each other in mass chaos. This is very well organized mass chaos, okay? The just on the offensive line, the different types of blocking, the different techniques that you can do, the different, reads and the different coverages, the different audibles, the different types of offenses that you can run, the different types of defenses that you run, the different types of coverages, how you mask and disguise coverages. It gets wildly complex. But at some point, we got to ask the question, how's our blocking? Not like all the other things, just are we blocking people? How is our tackling? How is our throwing? How is our catching, right? It is these core central ideas. In fact, one of the people who I think is just a phenomenal leader is the coach of Duke basketball. His name is Coach K. In part, I think he's a phenomenal leader because we shared the first letter of our last name together. But besides that, he is a phenomenal coach. He teaches leadership classes. In fact, he is the coach of the team, USA team basketball, because he has a unique ability to bring superstars. I'm talking about how do you get Kobe and LeBron, and if you think Kobe is better than LeBron, then I'm going to pray for you, okay? And Kevin Durant, snake in the grass, okay? But whoa, I just stepped on some toes. Get ready for the rest of the sermon. So, how do you bring all these people together? He's a phenomenal leader, but here's what he does. And now I read this in a book. Here's what he does the first day of practice. Now, in basketball, in the NCAA, everybody has to play at least their freshman year of college. The very first practice, the very first thing he does is he says, men, now Duke is one of the predominant basketball universities. They are, without a doubt, they produce prospect. Almost everybody who starts goes and makes millions in the NBA. He says, men, this is how you tie your shoes. You know why I love that? Because here's what he knows. You don't want to get 2/3 into the game. You don't want to get down to the last 2 minutes of the game. And I assumed that you knew how to tie a knot in your shoes really well, and yet your shoe comes off. In fact, if you follow this, then you know one of the players that came out of this Duke basketball is a guy named Zion Williams. Anybody familiar with Zion? Okay, sweet. Thanks for all 5 of your hands. That's wonderful. Zion is like a freak of nature in terms of an athlete. All right, dude is ginormous and yoked at the same time, but can jump ungodly high. He would hit his head on those lights up there. He is just, my dude is incredible. And now he's making millions of dollars in the NBA. Can you imagine Coach K all right, Zion, I know you're going to make more than I'll ever make. You're just going to make a phenomenal amount of money. But hey, let me teach you how to tie your shoes. And in fact, Zion did have a shoe problem. But it wasn't his laces. In fact, his laces were stronger than his shoes, and at one point he blew out his entire shoe. And that was a whole different sub thing for Nike, but here's why I say all that. Because the truth is that happens to us as Christians. That happens to us as a church. That oftentimes we can get so consumed with the different programs and the different ideas and the different beliefs and the different sets of doctrine and theology and the different ideologies and kind of ways that we can, do what God has called us to do and follow Jesus and things like that. The truth is that as Christians, it is really easy, especially the longer that you've been a Christian, to lose the irreducible minimums of our faith, of what it means to be a Christian. And so this series really tracks along that narrative arc. Week 1, we're simply going to define this. What is a Christian? Next few weeks, we're going to talk about what are the core behaviors or the core habits of a Christian. But today, we're going to ask this one simple question. What is a Christian? What is a Christian? And here's why that's a difficult question to answer. And I would say, if you're automatically thinking, okay, yeah, somebody who believes in Jesus, that's a super churchy answer, so stop, okay? We get it, you're saved. But here's the truth. If you were to ask somebody that, or somebody was to ask you that more so on the street, are you a Christian? Some of us would say, yeah. Some of us would say, well, what do you mean by Christian? Some of us would say, yeah, but... We'd have qualifiers. Yeah, but I'm not that type of a Christian. Yeah, but I don't believe what they believe. Yeah, but I'm not kind of, on that end of stuff. Some of us would say no, and some of us would say no, but. Like, no, I don't think I'm a Christian, but I'm cool with Christianity. I'm cool with God. I'm cool with Jesus. And if you were to actually take just the cumulative view of Christianity, you can believe a lot of things, think a lot of things, do a lot of things, and be a Christian, right? For some of you, let's just be fair. You're here. You're not sure if you believe in Jesus. You're not sure if you believe, in this whole God thing. But part of the reason is because you've experienced Christians, right? I mean, you've experienced Christians, and you've experienced some Christians who just generally had like a deference towards God. It was kind of like this whole Christianity thing was a multiple choice test. And they're like, well, I'm not Buddhist. I'm not Hindu. I'm not Islamic. I'm not atheist, so yeah, I guess, okay. Check Christian. That's the one that makes the most sense to me. And you've, on the other end of the spectrum, experienced the people who it's like, you are like a Christian. You're like, whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. You are crazy, and there's all kinds of things, and I just don't even understand you, Christian. Because as a Christian, you can believe a ton of different things. You can have all different versions and variations of affiliation and affinity towards God under the banner of Christian. And the reason that is, and the reason that the term Christian is so ambiguous is because the word Christian is a word that we created that's not really described to Christians in the Bible. And here's what's interesting. The word Christian only happens 3 times in the entire New Testament. In fact, it's wildly unhelpful in defining Christian. Because the word Christian, the 3 times it's named, is not in a positive sense. Each time it's used basically in a derogatory, condescending minimization. It'd be a lot more like a racial slur than it would be like, oh, you're a Christian. It only uses it 3 times. And so what we have to do, since the Bible doesn't do a good job of defining it, is go to the ultimate source of truth, aka Merriam-Webster's dictionary, okay? So here's what they would define that as. If you go and you can Google it for yourself. One who, or a person who professes belief in the teachings of Jesus. It's someone who professes belief in the teachings of Jesus. And let's be honest, this is why it's so difficult. It has nothing to do with which teachings. It has nothing to do with how much you profess or what that professing means or does or actions as. But I just simply profess a belief in, not Jesus, the teachings of Jesus. But let's be honest. Believing in the teachings of something has nothing to do with that actual thing or whether I am of that thing. So let me give you an example. I believe that culture as a whole is wildly over-caffeinated, okay? I also believe at 6:15, I'm getting up in the morning, I'm like, where is my coffee? Okay? I believe that's true, but just because I believe that and I think that, and I would say, okay, I generally agree with that, does not mean anything else besides the fact that I agree with it. I can believe that processed sugar is not the best thing for us, but you know what? My coffee is getting sugar in the morning, right? And if you drink black coffee, let me tell you, you are more of a man or a woman than I am. I just want you to know that. But here's the deal. Simply professing a belief in the teachings of something does not make you what that thing is. Now, the Bible does have a word to describe what we mean when we say Christian, but it is not Christian. The Bible does have a word to describe what it means to be a Christian. And it's simply this. It doesn't use the word Christian. It uses the word disciple. It does not use the word Christian. It uses the word disciple. Christian 3 times. Disciple 281 times in the New Testament. And so what I want to do to understand what this means to be a follower of Jesus, what this means to be a disciple, I want to go to the very first calling that Jesus gives for someone to be his disciple. But here's why. If you're a new hire at an organization, the first thing you want to see is, or one of the first things you want to see is, what's the job description? What does this job entail? Jesus, when he calls his first disciples, gives this magnificent, simplistic, but complex one-sentence job description to say this is a disciple. If you got your Bible, it's in the book of Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, we're going to start off. So Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee. Super early on, was just tempted in the desert. He just kind of started his ministry. And it says, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. So Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and maybe he's skipping rocks, or who knows what he's doing. But he looks out and he sees Andrew, and he sees Simon, who he had renamed as Peter, and he's about to call them to follow him. He's about to call them to say, "You're going to be my disciples." What's interesting is this actually isn't the first time that Jesus has met them. If you ever read the different accounts of the Gospels, which are the stories of Jesus' life in the New Testament, the Gospel of John records there was a time when Jesus was teaching. There was a disciple of John the Baptist. His name was Andrew. He heard Jesus talking. He said, "Man, this guy's incredible." He went and he started hearing his teachings. He went and he got his brother Simon, who Jesus would then rename as Peter, and he'd say, "Hey man, you got to hear this. I think we found the Messiah. I think this is the guy. I think this is the guy that we have all been waiting for, all been talking about." And so at this point, they're probably familiar with Jesus, but they're in the middle of fishing. They're doing their own thing. And so this is what Jesus says to them. Verse 19. And he said to them, in 2 words describes a disciple, "Follow me." Follow me. He said, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to be what you would call, a Christian, to what I would call a disciple. And I just want to give you the briefest description of what a disciple is. It's an invitation for you to follow me. Let me contrast these 2 definitions for you. You see, a Christian is one who professes belief in the teachings of Jesus, but a disciple is one who follows the teachings of Jesus. Very close, wildly different in terms of their implications and their consequence. You see, I can, again, profess a belief in anything. That doesn't mean I'm going to do anything with what I think. But the disciple, the ones who Jesus calls, it says that they are the ones who follow the teachings of Jesus. Jesus would walk along, and Jesus was essentially their rabbi, and they would say, "Man, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be your disciple. And so my life's goal as a disciple is to be exactly like you, my teacher, exactly like you, my rabbi, exactly like you, my wise sage." Now, if you follow religion, then you know this, that Jesus did not invent the term disciple, and he did not invent the term rabbi. In fact, if you follow religion, then you know that in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there was a time when the nation of Israel got exported all across the nation of Babylon, and then the Persians came in and said, "You can go home," and they started to rebuild the temple. It was the Second Temple Judaism. And if you ever study religion, between that Second Temple Judaism and kind of the intertestamental period, which is when the Old Testament ends and the New Testament begins, there is this gradual shift away from temple-focused Judaism to what's known as rabbinical Judaism. In other words, the central place of understanding, worship, the central place of knowledge and information no longer comes from the temple and the reading of the law. It comes from the rabbi. And in that, the goal of the disciple was like the goal of an apprentice. It's, I want to be exactly like my rabbi. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to hear him. And I want to not just have a general affiliation and acknowledgement of saying, okay, of all the rabbis, I'm going to choose, I'm going to choose Ronald because he seems like a good rabbi, I'm going to choose Billy because he seems like a good rabbi. I'm going to choose Susie because she seems like a good rabbi. No, it was the idea that I'm following you with my entire life. This is how, there's a book called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a collection of kind of rabbinical teachings or rabbinical thoughts towards Judaism and rabbis and things of that nature from about 200 BC to about 200 AD. It's a kind of anthology of Jewish writings that we have now that has been preserved. In the Mishnah, it gives a beautiful picture of what a rabbi and a discipleship relationship is. This is from the Mishnah, Avat 1:4. And if I'm pronouncing that wrong, then you're much better at Hebrew than I am, okay? So this is what it says. Let thy house be a meeting house for the wise. So let your house be a meeting house for the wise, for the sages, for the rabbis. And powder thyself, I love this, and powder thyself in the dust of their feet. In other words, I want you to invite them into your house. I want you to invite your rabbi into your house. But here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to simply invite them in. I want you to go and I want you to follow them. And as they're walking along, I want you to follow them so closely that maybe they're wearing some sandals. Maybe they're wearing some rainbow sandals. Maybe they're wearing some reef sandals. Maybe they're wearing kind of the Air Jesuses with the crossover straps, But as they're walking along, I want you to follow this rabbi. And as this rabbi's walking, he's going to kick up some dust because it's a little dusty place. And as he's kicking up dust, man, I want you to be so close to him that you're getting just dusty and dirty because you're walking in his footsteps. And when he sits down to teach, I want you to be sitting there right down at the dust and the dirt of his feet. Like your entire life is consumed with this rabbi and being exactly like him. And it's not that you're following him is the reason why he's the rabbi. It's the fact that you believe he is a wise and a good and a authoritative teacher. Therefore, you submit yourself to the rabbi who you desire with everything you have to be like, and you spend your entire life following him to the point where you're following him so closely that if he were to be walking, you would get dusty from his feet. He said, and this is what I want you to think of as he's giving you words, and drink the words with thirstiness. I wish, for the purpose of just a thought exercise, we could almost eradicate the idea of what we think of when we think of Christian. And when we put Christian, we could put this in. We could put disciple in. We could put follow with everything in. Because when the New Testament happened, when Jesus walked planet Earth, when the early church started, it was not a group of Christians, it was a group of disciples. Christians have a belief in, but disciples follow him. Christians can have a belief in, but disciples will follow him. This is what he says as you follow me. He said, follow me into this verse, and I will make you fishers of men. He said, I want you to follow me. And as you follow me, I'm not just asking you to follow me for the sake of following me. I want you to follow me because I'm going to give you a new purpose. I'm going to give you a new passion. I'm going to give you a new goal. I'm going to give you a new mission. And that mission is not simply to just be more like the rabbi for the sake of just, mirroring. Although it's a good person to mirror, it's a great person to mirror. It's for the sake that if you mirror and if you learn to be like me, I'm going to make you like me and who I am. Jesus would say as a person, as a rabbi, as a teacher, as the Messiah was someone who came to seek and save those that are lost. He said, man, this is the mission. And here's what was fascinating about Jesus. Here's what was fascinating is that There were people who followed Jesus who were nothing like Jesus. I mean, the worst of the sinful, like, not just like, some people that are bad and people you're like, whoa, like they're like the notorious sinners. Some of you, you're like, oh, that's me. Let me tell you, I'm glad you're here, because here's what was wild. When Jesus walked planet Earth, he would have loved you. And here's what's wild. You would have loved him. Isn't this true? When you see somebody who is authentically following God, not just giving the sense of a deference towards God, not just simply acknowledging God, not just simply picking God on a multiple choice test, but they are a disciple. They are following him. Isn't this true? That you see somebody who, though maybe you have a different set of ideals, maybe your ideology is different, maybe your morality is different, but here's what's wild. They follow Jesus, but man, they are wildly loving. Like, they're not judgmental. In fact, they're the opposite. They acknowledge their brokenness openly. For some of us, man, we're anti-God and anti-Jesus because we've run into a bunch of Christians and not a bunch of disciples. But there's some people who perhaps you've met. And when you met them, you couldn't really describe it and you couldn't really put words to it. But there was something inside of you. Man, you were just drawn to them. And you might have thought, like, I don't know if I'll ever believe what they believe, if I'll ever think what they think. But there was something about them that was magnetic, that was winsome, that was just attractive. And that's exactly what happened with Jesus. Here's my definition of the disciple. You can take this, you can use it, you can throw it away if you want to, if you disagree. Here's my definition of a disciple. A disciple is one who follows the teachings of Jesus for the mission of Jesus. A disciple is one who follows the teachings of Jesus for the mission of Jesus. He said, Jesus, I'm following you with my entire life, and I want to be like you. I believe eternity matters. I believe that heaven matters. I believe that unification with you matters, and so I am following you, but I want people to come to know you. I believe in a God who so loves me. He gave his only son. I believe in a God who so loves me that in light of my own brokenness, my own sinfulness, that I am alienated from God, and God in his holiness, like, I'm just too sinful to good myself into his good graces. God saw that, knew that because of the consequence and the implications of my sinfulness, I couldn't make myself right again, right? If this was a speeding ticket, the fine was too great. I had in fact infringed on the law, and because of that, I had to somehow have a restitution. I could not make that restitution on my own, and so God did the most loving thing in the history of humanity. He came in the form of a baby. And that baby would perform miracles. That baby would die on the cross. And when he died on the cross, by the way, nobody believed he was the Son of God. Because nobody believed that God was going to die. But you know what happened? They saw a resurrected Jesus, and it changed the world. So here's what I want to end this with. It's a real simple question. Some of you guys, you are just type A, and you are very mentally acute. You're very reason-based, logic-based, all that stuff. And so I appreciate the fact that you're here. And I would just want to apologize that sometimes the church has done a bad job of kind of connecting. But I would simply say this. This is a great question that I think if I was here and I was being critical, I would ask. Can you be a Christian and not be a disciple? Can you be a Christian and not be a disciple? That's a beautiful question. Can you be a Christian and not be a disciple? In other words, can I agree with the teachings of Jesus? Can I have salvation, but not actually follow like a disciple? Because following like a disciple seems incredibly costly. I'm going to answer that two ways. One, I'm going to answer that in a biblical sense, and second, I'm going to answer that in a logical sense, in case you don't think that the Bible is authoritative, which I understand. I disagree, but I understand. Number one, you would have a very difficult time if the idea of what brings salvation is based on the Bible. You would have a very difficult time creating a difference between these two, because again, the Bible doesn't talk about a Christian. We've created that 3 times degradingly, 281 times descriptively. I would, one, say that there is no difference, that we have created a difference in subcategories, that when they thought Christian, they thought disciple. Those were synonymous. And the second one, I think is, so I think this one's, I don't know if this is helpful. I think it is. It's helpful to me at least. I think if you decided, and by the way, I'm not talking about like, okay, like I struggle with stuff. You know how it is. Like everybody struggles with stuff. Like, man, I have some sinful patterns, some habits I know I should follow more. And there's just this thing inside of me that wants to do what I know God doesn't want me to do. And there's just warring inside of me. I'm talking about just general, like, okay, I disciple, whoa, Nelly, but like, I'm cool with like Jesus, but I just don't know if I'm in for all that. Here's what I would say. That might be the most illogical thing that you can do. And let me explain that, because that's offensive. But I really genuinely believe this. You're a reasonable person. That is wildly unreasonable. If I actually believe he's God, like not just sitting in the corner of the universe, but all-knowing God. And I actually think that he cares about my life. I actually think that he holds the power of everything within the power of his hand. I mean, within his mighty word, all things are sustained. If I actually believe that and think that I know better, I would say, do I actually believe that? Let me give you a really obscure reference. Some of you guys weren't around when this happened. There's a beautiful narrative that happened in our culture. It was in the late 80s, and many of you are familiar with it. It's this incredible story called Back to the Future 2. Anybody tracking? Some of you, man, a lot of you weren't alive then. I acknowledge that. Some of you guys weren't alive for Y2K or, 9/11, but just, pray for all of us older-ish folk, that are in the building. There's this incredible story called Back to the Future 2. And this just makes so much sense to me. So I'm going to try to make it make sense for everybody. If you're not familiar with Back to the Future 2, by the way, Christmas break is still happening, so you've got about 7 hours, maybe 12 hours or so after this whole thing concludes. I would say just go watch it. Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly, he's the man. That's his character's name. He's with this guy named Doc. Don't know Doc's real name, okay? But Marty McFly and Doc, and the whole premise of the movie is they figure out how to time travel. Don't ask too many questions because it gets a little fuzzy. But Back to the Future 1, they go back to the past, they're trying to get back to the future. Back to the Future 2, they realize there's some stuff that happens in the future that they want to try to adjust and they want to try to fix. So they go to the future, and McFly finds this like sports albums, this sports anthology that has all of the answers to all of the games that's going to happen from the late 80s till 2015. Let me just pause and say this. If you watch this movie, our 2015 is so wildly disappointing, it's absurd, okay? Like we have cool scooters that we can do an app with, right? They had hoverboards, okay? So we're just oh cool, I'm gonna lean forward and go on my little doohickey, and they're I'm flying. They didn't have flat screens, they had holograms that they were watching their TVs on. But 2015, he gets this sports album or almanac, goes back to the 80s. This guy named Biff gets a hold of it. Now let me just say this. If your name is Biff in here this morning, I am so sorry for you, okay? Because you can't be a good person to be named Biff. If you know somebody named Biff, let's just hope that's not their real name, okay? Kind of kidding. But for real, we'll pray for you, and you can. I have so many other churches I would recommend. But Biff finds the almanac. Biff finds how to time travel, goes back to the 50s, where he gives it to younger Biff. And younger Biff takes it. He proves to younger Biff, that this, in fact, is real. And so this changes the course of the trajectory of Biff's life, because Biff, who realizes this almanac has all the answers, he can trust in it. It is faithful. It is reliable. And he begins to bet and bet and bet. And he makes millions of it. And the entire rest of the movie is kind of trying to spend resolving this. That how do we go back and make Biff not get this sports thing, because it just radically changes the future. Here's the thing. The reason that Biff would make so much money in this movie, and if this ever happened to us, the reason we would all make so much movie is not because of the fact that we just generally say, okay, yep, I believe that's true, but because if we actually bet, it would change the future of our life. It's that if I didn't bet, it would most likely be because I didn't believe. I want you to imagine, if you're in here and you're kind of in the numbers world, in the investment world, perhaps in the banking world, isn't this true? If somebody could go back to you today If somebody could go back to you, in fact, a couple decades ago, let's say 1997, and they said, okay, this is going to sound wild. There's this brand new thing called the internet. I know you don't really get what it is. But there's going to be a company that's coming out. It's called Google. I know that sounds wacky, but you should put all your money into it. Like if you actually believe that I'm from the future and that I'm trustworthy, like if you believe that, you're going to put your money in that. Now, that's kind of a weird thought exercise. But if I didn't put my money into it, the reason would probably be because I didn't believe that you were from the future, because who could believe that? If I could fast forward a couple years later and say, man, there's this wild thing that's happening up in Cambridge out of Harvard. There's this interesting guy. He's kind of goofy, kind of weird. His last name is Zuckerberg, and he's about to invent this thing called Facebook. I know that seems weird and obscure, and I know there's not even a thing called a category of life of social media, but he's about to invent this brand new category of life called social media. And we kind of have MySpace that was a derivative, and if you were a top eighter, then like good for you, but you got left in the past, right? But like I want you to go all in with Facebook, or if we went a couple years forward from that and we said, okay, I want you to go all in. And again, I'm from the future. I'm telling you that this is how, and this is what you should believe, and this is what you should know. You should put all your money in Apple because they're about to change the game with this little thing called the iPhone. You've heard of the iPod. You're going to have that, but think phone and think way better than you could ever imagine before. And then actually, I want you to go from this whole iPhone thing, and I want you to do this thing that's going to kind of, again, it's going to shift, it's going to change, and it's going to be this thing called social media where you just scroll and you just look at pictures, and it sounds really kind of simplistic. It's going to be called Instagram, but people are going to make millions of dollars by simply having millions of followers, and they do nothing with their life, which if that's you, I'm so glad that you have so many followers. I hope that you've done something to deserve that. But there's this wild thing where like you don't have to do anything. You just like, oh, I have a pretty smile. Here's 700 million followers, right? And now I pay you as a company. Anyway, it's a whole different side subject, right? But if I could go back in the future and I could say, hey, I know you think Blockbuster is cool. Bro, there's going to be a thing. I'm just telling you. It's called Netflix. Sell and invest. I know Barnes & Nobles. It's so wonderful. There's going to be this little company that starts as a book company. It's going to be called Amazon. You should invest. Now, why do I say all that? Because if you actually believed that I knew what I was talking about, it would be so wildly illogical not to invest. If you actually believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is God, that as John 1:1 says it, he was with God in the beginning and he was God in the beginning. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. If you actually believe that, the most reasonable thing you can do is to follow him with your entire life. Anything short of that makes no sense. Why would I hold on to Blockbuster when Netflix is on the horizon? Perhaps you don't know exactly what it means to follow. Perhaps you're not just really totally sure what to do with that, and you're kind of thinking, okay, I want to follow him. The good news is we're going to spend the next 3 weeks talking and presenting with the core ideas of the followers of Jesus. But here's what I want to do today. And say, are you a disciple? Are you a disciple? Are you following? Christians are an invented category that we inherited because it meant little Christ, and those it was derogatory in the beginning. We just thought, sure, that sounds good. Was a disciple. Are you a disciple? Are you a follower? And if not, but you want to be, the beautiful news is we have a God who so again loved us. He did not wait in the corners and the corridors of the universe and eternity, but he dwelt among us, died on the cross for us. So though we aren't good enough people to earn our way into his good graces, he died to make us right, to make us whole, to pay the payment that we couldn't pay. And now we freely live for him, our rabbi, who we believe knows everything and holds everything and is the only one worth following. Let's pray together. Jesus, we all acknowledge there are areas of our lives where we don't follow you as we ought to. There are areas of our life where we know that you know, but we want to hold on to. Because to follow you how we know that you know that we ought to seems wildly uncomfortable. It seems difficult to integrate it. There's just so many things, so many ways, so many areas that would be difficult. But Jesus, we trust you as our rabbi. We trust you as our high priest. We trust you as our Messiah. Jesus, we trust you and we want to follow you. And we know that there is nothing in this world that deserves our following more than you, our King, our Messiah, our Rabbi, Jesus. I pray that you would take us from a group of people, for those of us who are in the room, who have always had a sense of a cultural, maybe just deference towards you, multiple choice, we pick you over the other stuff, that Jesus, our entire lives would be consumed with, passionate about. We would follow you with reckless abandon because we believe in you. Not to try to make you happy with us, not to try to make you glad, but Jesus, just simply because we believe you. So we follow you with everything that we have. And I pray for everybody in this room who's just kind of on the fence and not really sure what they believe and not really sure what they think and trying to sit through this whole thing. God, I pray that you would put not Christians in their lives, not this new made up invented category. You would put disciples, people who are authentically following you, whose lives just say, I want to follow you so closely. I'm just getting dusty. I'm getting dirty. I'm getting the dust from my rabbi sandals on me because I am passionate. I am consumed with becoming like my rabbi, and his name is Jesus. I pray that you would put those people in their lives and it would flip upside down what they think of when they think of followers of you. That they would see people who with everything they have are authentically living for you, following you, yet at the same time love, serve, and are not judgmental, but just say, me too. I have problems too. I have a past too. I'm not perfect, but I am consumed with becoming like my rabbi, Jesus. God, I pray that you would give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we've just heard and the courage to do it. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.